Good evening. Welcome to the SSAT Public Policy and Advocacy Committee webinar. My name is Dr. Anthony D'Andrea, and I'm a newly trained colorectal surgeon who will be starting his job in Galveston, Texas. I'll serve as one of your moderators, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Dr. Anthony Vine, from the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. In tonight's webinar, we'll be joined by three amazing guest lecturers who will talk about current and evolving issues in public policy that affect surgeons and, more importantly, our patients. Without further ado, I'll allow my co-moderator to introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first talk is by Dr. Mark Reiner, Professor of Surgery and Obstetrics and Urology at Mount Sinai. He is the chairman of the Manhattan Council of the New York chapter of the American College of Surgeons and has served on the Board of Governors of the American College. Dr. Reiner?
Sure. So we're going to start this off with looking at the both New York State and federal surprise bill and its effect on surgical care, surgeons, and patients in the United States. So we have to go a little bit about the history of this.
Dr. Reiner, can you please share your slides?
You don't have them?
You have to share them right now.
That's what I was. Hold on.
Do the share screen.
Yeah, no, that's the problem. I'll be right back. Give me a second. I'm going to have to sign off and sign back on. I apologize. You can't see the screen? You can't see them?
No. If you press the share, did you open the PowerPoint yet?
Yeah, it's on the PowerPoint. Unfortunately, it's the whole screen and there's nothing else there. So I'm going to have to somehow sign out and come back on. So give me a minute. What happened here? I'm going to go to a different screen.
Should we move on with our second lecture in the meantime, Dr. Vine?
That's a good idea.
Let's do that. Let's switch things around. Emma?
Sure thing. I'm happy to kick things off. Let me get my presentation pulled up as well.
Well, I've got it now if you want. I'll leave that up to you.
Either way works for me.
Whatever everybody wants.
Okay, Emma, can you stop sharing for now?
I can.
Dr. Reiner, can you share screen on your computer? There you go, and then put it in presentation mode to the left. Left, not that one. Yeah, that one. There you go.
Okay, we're good to go. All right.
There you go. You're online.
Sorry about that. Okay, so now we'll start again. So in 2012, in March 2012, the New York State Department of Financial Services came out with a white paper, and it was called An Unwelcome Surprise, or How New York State Residents Were Getting Stuck with Unexpected Medical Bills from Out-of-Network Physicians. The article documented some really egregious physician abuses regarding surprise and emergency bills. There were ICU visits for $5,000 and $10,000 and $15,000 a visit. There was an orthopedic surgeon who billed over $200,000 for setting fractures in an emergency room. And there were many assist fees that were in the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and $60,000 range. When I saw this in 2012, I decided that we needed to, first of all, I thought it was grossly unfair to patients. And I wanted to be a patient advocate. And I knew that something was going to come of this, either at the state level or federal level, and that if we didn't have our hands in the very beginning of the implementation, that certainly from a financial point of view, the surgeons would be dramatically affected. So we went ahead and we lobbied in New York State. And normally in New York State, it takes about 6 to 7 years to get a bill passed. It only took me 2 years to get this bill passed, because once again, we made it available. We explained to people what it was about. Both the governor's office and the legislatures were all interested in doing this. So in March of 2015, Governor Cuomo announced a law protecting New York consumers from surprise or out-of-network medical bills. And what we did was we wrote this in such a way as to hold patients harmless for taking them out of the process. We took them out of the process when a surprise and emergency bill. They were responsible only for their insurance and co-insurance and deductibles, and the rest of the bills would be adjudicated between the physicians who were out of network and their insurance companies. And we felt the best way of doing this was to establish a fair and independent mediation process, which was called the IDR, or the Independent Dispute Resolution. The IDR actually was modeled after baseball arbitration. And for people who don't understand that, in baseball arbitration, the player comes up with an amount of money he wants over X number of years. The owners come up with another situation where X number of years to X number of dollars. And the resolution board, the arbitrating board, will make a decision as to what they thought was closer, the owners' numbers and years or the players. And that would be based on looking at the history of baseball and other players within the league. Then they would come to a solution, and the solution was either the player's number or the owner's number, and it was binding. So they don't really set a number. They just pick either one side or the other side after looking at all the other options. The only exception to this is in patients who have no insurance. They are then allowed to discuss and come up with a number that is acceptable to them. And because we felt the fairest thing to do was we really put in the bill that 80% of UCR, the usual customer reasonable, was the number that the insurance companies used as one of the criteria for determining a reimbursement for these surprise and emergency bills. So the New York State bill was actually quite good, okay, but it had a few areas of contention. First of all, it didn't address hospital bills. So we corrected that in 2017. It didn't, of course, address federally regulated insurance plans. Federal government, obviously Medicare and Medicaid is administrated by the federal government. All self-insured plans are regulated by the federal government and not the state. So the federal government did not address those plans in New York State. And once again, we used the reimbursement as a percent of UCR. And we did this because I thought that writing this bill, we had convinced the governor's office and the legislature that this was the most legitimate way of establishing a reasonable payment for services rendered. It was an independent, nonprofit organization, not influenced by insurance companies or their insurance companies' manipulation of fees. So what happened with the IDR in New York State? So from 2015 to 2018, in the emergency aspect, there were 2,250 disputes. 580 were resolved for the insurance company, 344 resolved for physicians. In the surprise end, there were 1,486 disputes, 106 resolved for insurance companies, 300 resolved for physicians. The reason the numbers don't add up is at least 50% of the claims are usually ineligible because they're not really a surprise or emergency bill. But by using the UCR number, you can see that it didn't really favor the insurance companies or the physicians, since in both cases they were split differently. So it didn't really favor one thing. When we go to the QPA, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, it's almost always okay in the insurance company's favor. So there was a federal no surprise bill signed into law in 2020, which went into effect in January 1st of this year. And it addressed these ERISA, or Employment Retirement Income Security Act, regulated insurance plans, which are the self-insured plans that are not regulated by the state or the Department of Finances for the state. Unfortunately, they tied their reimbursement to QPA, which is the qualifying payment amount or the average of in-network payments. And we'll discuss this in a minute. And there are a number of legal actions in the process to modify the methodology used to determine these reimbursements or to completely eliminate the bill. Obviously, a number of physician groups saw that if they're going to base reimbursement to some degree on QPA and not UCR, the numbers are going to be dramatically reduced. So the federal IDR is set up now. Total IDR companies available to adjudicate these claims. They get paid anywhere from $200 to $600 a claim, and the loser pays the claim. They're up from April 15th to August 11th of this year. There were 46,000 disputes already entered in federally, and it's been such a large number that some companies no longer will even accept dispute claims because of volume overload. So what was the legal action taken against the federal? Because once again, New York State's law is a great law because it ties it to a UCR, and it's been very, very fair. The federal, it was felt by physicians throughout the country, was not fair because it was really based to some degree on the QPA, which was a manipulated number by insurance companies. So in February 24th of 2021, almost 2 months after the law was enacted, a federal judge in the state of Texas struck down parts of the federal no surprise bill based on purely faulty arbitration process. What they essentially said was most of the arbitration process was going to look at the QPA and not much else. So the federal judge enforced this. In April 22nd of 2022, the DOJ appealed the ruling, but later asked for the court to hold off on the appeal pending the release of new guidelines for the IDR. And the new guidelines for the IDR were released just a few weeks ago, which is on August 22nd of this year. And they added some things for the IDR to consider, additional information other than the QPA. The new guidelines stated that other factors, including complexity of the case, acuity of care, surgeon's experience, and downcoding or potential downcoding by insurance companies should be weighed in determining physician reimbursement. Though it added other things, the only number from a financial, a dollar sense, is really the QPA. So what happened to using the QPA as part of this methodology in calculating reimbursement? Why is it in such a disputed number? When we did this in New York State, we felt that UCR was the fair methodology in determining physician payment. New York State was the first state to pass a surprise and emergency bill, so finding this methodology of payment was not an insurance industry's radar. Once passed in New York State, however, other states began to use the New York bill as a model for their own legislation. The insurance companies now became cognizant or aware of the financial impact of these bills and lobbied state legislatures to use QPA instead of the UCR as an aid in determining reimbursements. And most states now use QPA, not the UCR. So what are the issues regarding the UCR as one of the methodologies in determining reimbursements? So if you look at the IDR process in New York State, there's been an increase of 24% in these bills in payments to out-of-network doctors using an IDR based on UCR, while there was a recorded decrease of payments of 25% in states like California who use the QPA. The healthcare industry spends approximately $700 million a year in lobbying efforts, and of course the main objective is to lower cost in the hopes of not affecting patient care. But of course, you know, the bottom line is really what gets them involved. So we need to explain a little bit about what UCR is. And when we use UCR, we use Fair Health in New York State. When Governor Cuomo was Attorney General in New York State, he sued some of the major insurance companies for manipulating the data. In other words, the insurance companies fix their payments to doctors based on a percent of usual, customary, and reasonable. That would be 80% or 70%. These companies lowered the UCR, they manipulated that number to a not real number so that they would have to reimburse the patients less money per claim. The insurance companies were found at fault and they were fined a few $100 million. Some of that money was given to start a nonprofit, unaffiliated company called Fair Health. And Fair Health, what they did was Fair Health set up a methodology for determining what a usual, customary, and regular fee is. So for instance, what they would do is they would take a zip code. They would take the total payments out of network using and in network, Medicare, Medicaid, physician fees, and they took out the highs, they took out the lows, and they had a methodology for determining what they considered a legitimate number. And 100% UCR means that 100% of the people in that area, other than the excluded ones, would be covered if 100% payment was made. They elected to think that 80% was fair, so they established a number of 80% of UCR as a number that they thought was fair in adjudicating and determining what a fair reimbursement would be. And that 80% of all physicians' fees would fall into the 80%, 20% would be higher. So that's essentially what it was. And remember, it is a nonpartisan, it is not affiliated with physicians, not affiliated with doctors at all, okay, and totally independent and nonprofit. So when you look at this, okay, Medicare reimbursements to hospitals in 2020 were down a negative 8.5 margin and projected to be a negative 13.2 and up to 14% negative margin in 2022. And the fact is that when you go on the data and you look at it, some are already saying in many places it's about a negative 20% margin. So underpayment to hospitals for Medicare and Medicaid were in excess of $150 billion in 2020. QPA payments, okay, these average in-network payments, use Medicare rates as the methodology of determining payments to surgeons and range from about 80% Medicare to about 120%. There are out-of-networks that can be 150, 200, or 300. These are predominantly the in-network rates. The QPA surgical fees are 1/5 to 1/15 of 80% UCR. So the disparity is huge. Since the insurance companies determine their in-network rates, there is no doubt that they will continue to manipulate and lower reimbursement for surgical procedures with a direct effect on lowering the QPA. And it's the reason that we feel that the federal law is inappropriate by using the QPA, since it's all manipulated by the insurance companies. So what effect does the surprise bill have on physicians? Some of these numbers are going to be very interesting. 2%, between 1 and 2%, but up to 2%, depending on state, of physicians actually no longer accept Medicare as payment in full. They've either opted out of Medicare or have a concierge-based practice. 16% of physicians are out of network, and this number is increasing. And the reason for the migration of the in-network surgeons to out-of-network surgeons is because low reimbursement requires a proportionate increase in volume to maintain income. This may not be feasible for some, and thus precipitate early retirement with the direct effect of lowering the percent of surgeons per 100,000 population. This reduction in income may also cause a dramatic shift from private surgical practices to full-time physicians. One should decrease reimbursements, as the result is by using QPA, and we see that it decreased 25% in California, for determining acceptable fees for these surprise and emergency bills. It will continue to undermine quality of care by triggering either early retirements or decreasing physician time with patients. This all translates to less direct patient contact, decreased patient satisfaction, and diminished care with suboptimal surgical outcomes. In addition, all these IVRs are supposed to get these payments and adjudicated within 30 days. But you have to have the adequate paperwork, et cetera, and it's taking a significantly longer time than that. And as stated before, some companies won't even take new because their volume is overloaded. So these are all effects that the QPA is really having in the surprise and emergency bill on physicians and patient care. So what about the no surprise bill, which is federal, and patient care? As physicians increase their volume, there's no doubt that they will decrease their time in direct patient contact. Using the QPA as the methodology for determining reimbursement for surprise and emergency bills will result in less physician participation in network. This will have a direct effect on access of care. Interesting enough, rural populations will feel this even greater than urban populations. Rural surgeons make up 12.8% of all surgeons, while rural population is almost 16%. And almost 60% of rural surgeons are over the age of 50, while only it's about 49% of urban surgeons are over 50. So the effect of lowering income will dramatically increase the number of surgeons who go into retirement, and this is especially be hit in the rural areas. And most rural surgeons are out of network because they make their money going from hospital to hospital, and they do mostly mostly emergency surgical intervention. And the college looked at this on a committee I sat on about 5 years ago, and there was no doubt that the rural surgeons are going to be more dramatically affected than the surgeons that are in urban settings. So in summary, the No Surprise Bill at the federal level and all of the state hold harmless bills are necessary for both the health and financial stability of our patients, of course. However, allowing the insurance industry to overtly manipulate the system by pressing for the average QPA or in-network payment will in the short run increase the shortage of physicians and in the long run have a direct negative impact on accessibility and quality of care to all our patients. That's it.
Thank you for that excellent review. And I know that we're very grateful for all that you did in New York for fair health and establishing usual and customary rates, but hopefully this does not portend ill for the future. So our next talk is going to be by Emma Zimmerman, who hails from the political and advocacy arm of the American College of Surgeons.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Dr. Reiner, I think you have to stop sharing your screen before I can share mine. All right, so hi, everybody. I'm Emma Zimmerman. I'm a congressional lobbyist with the American College of Surgeons Division of Advocacy and Health Policy in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to be talking about the issue of Medicare physician payment and the cuts that we are working to prevent this year. So to set the scene a little bit first, preventing cuts to Medicare reimbursement has been an issue in Washington for more than 20 years. And there are several problems with the current law that contribute to this. First, as many of you are familiar with, the Medicare physician fee schedule is constrained by a budget neutral financing mechanism. So if CMS decides to increase reimbursement in one area, it has to make cuts elsewhere. And over the last few years, CMS has enacted policies to increase payment for certain evaluation and management services, which unfortunately has triggered payment cuts for surgical services, among others. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Second, there is no legislative mechanism to meaningfully adjust the pool of dollars in the fee schedule. As CMS increases payment for certain services or adds coverage for new procedures, they can take more slices of the pie, but the pie essentially doesn't get any bigger. The current law allows for just $20 million per year to cover new technology and services, which is a number that was established back in 1989 and is just not nearly enough today. In addition, when CMS eliminates a covered service or reduces payment for something, that money does not go back into the pot. It's removed from the fee schedule. The physician fee schedule is also the only fee schedule under Medicare that has no automatic inflationary update, despite steady increases in inflation and practice costs. And I want to pause on this point for just a moment because the impact is dramatic. So adjusted for inflation in practice costs, physician payments have actually decreased by approximately 20% from 2001 to 2021. If you take a look at this graph, the orange line is where the conversion factor would be if it were adjusted for inflation, and the blue line is where it actually is. And if this trend continues, the conversion factor will not reach the level that it was at in the year 2000, again, adjusting for inflation, until approximately 2067. And I think that this is particularly impactful as we're thinking about the next generation of doctors, future doctors who are starting medical school in 2022, who will likely be graduating with an enormous amount of student loan debt, will be working until retirement age before they are paid the equivalent of what physicians were paid the year that they were born. And that is simply not sustainable. Finally, it's worth noting a few of the challenges with MACRA. As some of you might remember, Congress took steps to prevent steep payment cuts caused by the Sustainable Growth Rate formula back in 2015 with the passage of the Medicare Access and Ship Reauthorization Act. MACRA was intended to smooth the transition from fee-for-service to value-based care, in large part through the use of alternative payment models. However, that effort has fallen short in part because there are simply not enough APMs available for specialists to participate in. The Physician-Focused Payment Model Technical Advisory Committee, or PTAC, which is an advisory body that was created by MACRA, has recommended several models developed by the physician community, but CMS has failed to implement them. And this leaves surgeons stuck in a broken payment system without any meaningful opportunities to participate in value-based payment arrangements. So that's a fairly brief overview of the broader challenges with the current Medicare physician payment system. Turning to where we are today, what we've seen over the last few years is that all of these factors have compounded with various CMS and congressional policies to drastically cut reimbursement for surgical services. As I mentioned at the beginning, CMS has increased payment for E&M services, resulting in cuts to the conversion factor. There is also a 2% Medicare sequester, which was mandated by the Budget Control Act of 2011, which was delayed several times, but ultimately took effect this past summer. And a budgetary requirement known as PAYGO triggers a 4% cut to Medicare payment if it is not waived. We dealt with all of these same cuts last year. The physician community did a tremendous amount of work educating lawmakers on the importance of stopping these cuts. And last December, Congress passed the Protecting Medicare and American Farmers from Sequester Cuts Act, which significantly mitigated the cuts for 2022. However, that was a temporary fix, and surgeons are once again facing cuts in 2023. So the 2023 MPFS proposed rule once again includes a cut to the conversion factor of approximately 4.5% this time, making it the lowest conversion factor since 1994. And the 4% PAYGO cut is set to take effect in January as well. So that is an approximately 8.5% cut on top of the 2% Medicare sequester that took effect in July and the rising costs of delivering care, with no inflationary update and no planned increases to the conversion factor until 2026. Now, while we are just talking about Medicare reimbursement here, it is important to note that cuts to Medicare have implications across the entire payer space. Many state Medicaid programs and private insurers base their rates on Medicare, and these cuts obviously impact more than just physicians' bottom lines. As it becomes more cost prohibitive to run an independent practice, we can expect to see consolidation accelerate. This can threaten patient access as community sites are closing, and in many cases drives care to higher cost settings. So Congress has to act this year to stop these cuts. A bill has already been introduced in the House by Representatives Ami Bera and Larry Bucshon to stop that 4.5% conversion factor cut for 2023. The College of Surgeons is also seeking legislation to waive the 4% PAYGO cut and provide a one-year inflationary update. And in addition to that short-term relief, we're really urging Congress to consider long-term reforms to the payment system. We've called for congressional committees to hold hearings on long-term payment stability and improvements to MACRA. And we're also urging lawmakers to weigh in with CMS and direct them to test more APMs that specialists can participate in the meantime. Looking ahead to the end of the year and the feasibility of getting these things done, there's a few factors to keep in mind. First, there is a limited congressional calendar. It's an election year, which means very little policy is going to be getting done, as lawmakers will be busy campaigning in October and November. The exception to that is so-called must-pass government funding legislation. The federal fiscal year ends on September 30th. Congress is expected to pass a stopgap funding measure known as a continuing resolution that will bump that deadline into mid-December. That puts us into the lame duck session after the election. At that point, Congress could pass another CR and punt that funding deadline again into the spring, or they could get an omnibus spending package of some sort together. That spending package is the most likely legislative vehicle for Congress to stop the payment cuts. They could also put together some kind of healthcare specific legislative package with legislation to stop the cuts, possibly lumped together with mental health or pandemic preparedness legislation, a couple of the other bigger issues that are out there. But either way, it's likely to be in December, and we're going to be lobbying them hard to make sure that they take action before the end of the year. So how can you get involved? The best thing you can do is contact your members of Congress. Hearing from physicians on the ground experiencing these challenges is by far the most compelling thing for lawmakers. We hear that all the time. We really need you raising the alarm about how these cuts will affect your practices and the need for long-term reform. Fellows of the college can take action right through our Surgeon's Voice platform. And if you're a member of any other professional associations with offices here in DC, they likely have similar advocacy resources. That is it from me, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Emma. That was a very informative and excellent talk. It's my pleasure to now introduce our third and final lecture. Please welcome Dr. Franco Pelk. He's a physician executive, surgeon, and medical director for quality and health policy at the American College of Surgeons. And today he's going to be talking about the future of healthcare payment systems and healthcare quality metrics.
Thanks very much. And it's really interesting to try and help paint a little bit more of the future landscape of what's going on. You just heard from Emma the very legacy policy world that the Congress lives in, but the administrative arms of the federal government are not so legacy based. So when you look at many things like conversion factors and different payment cycles from Medicare, you feel like it's Groundhog Day all over again. And yet there's a lot more going on out there. And some of it has to do with the changing landscape that's happening, where surgeons are less and less solo or self-employed practitioners, and more they are employed surgeons. We now know that about 75% of the surgeons are employed, and we expect that growth of that number is somewhat flattening, but it continues to just creep up slowly. So a lot of that means that when the government comes in and cuts revenues to Medicare, do surgeons actually see a cut? They may see a revenue cut, but the compensation we're seeing our surgeons year after year for the last 5 years has continued to climb. And the Congress gets this. They get this in a MedPAC report. They get it in other reports as well. So when we come knocking on the door and say, don't cut me anymore, you haven't kept up with inflation, they know that we are massively employed by the hospitals who have seen year after year increases, or that many of our fellows own ambulatory surgery centers, which are seeing an increase year after year. So they don't look at this as the net payment by CPT or RVU. They look at this as the net value of the care that's being delivered, and however it is that we make our living as surgeons. So some of that really gets down to something I just want to plant a seed, and that is in the modernization of healthcare, as we transform and reframe our industry, we can't be valuing surgeons merely by RVUs. And there's so much more that we are doing as surgeons that is missed or lost on the RVU world. So we're seeing that in the federal payment model, we've got to pave the road to value. And that means not just value-based payment or revenues, but value-based compensation. And those are different terms, and they're not fully aligned yet, but we're starting to see some alignment as we hear from the different fellows that are out there. The current federal payment model is almost 50% Medicare Advantage. And surgeons are able to negotiate any fee at any level in a Medicare Advantage program. In some parts of the country, it's less than Medicaid. In other parts of the country, it's significantly more than Medicare. So that's a negotiable area. The same is true with ACOs and Medicare shared savings plans, who are now gaining interest in how do we actually engage specialty medicine. They feel like they've got their arms around primary care and chronic care, but they don't feel like they've got anything similar in medical specialty or surgical care. And yet that's exactly where CMS wants to go with Medicare fee-for-service. They've put an ambitious goal of getting to ACO-dominated Medicare payments by 2030. Now, I think it's ambitious to think they can get any significant bump in this, but that's where they're going to make their efforts. So we've got a workforce that's more employed than self-employed. And we got shifting payment models converting to Medicare Advantage and fee-for-service into ACOs. The way that surgeons have always thought about their compensation for the last 3 decades has been related to volume. And everyone's talking about, it can't just be about volume anymore. It has to be about the team of care, the episode of care, the value for care, the price of care, and the quality. So how are we actually compensating our surgeons? Is it going to continue to be that we got all these revenues in from ASCs, from hospital-based, from CPTs, and we put them into a compensation pool, and then we drain it with RVUs? Well, it's being drained differently now in different organizations around the country, where the employer is saying, how do I get alignment? Maybe I want volume out of my neurosurgeons. Maybe that's not what I need out of my transplant surgeons, although I wouldn't mind it, but there's something else I need for them to be working on. So when we start to say and start to explore what are the attributes that are appropriately recognizing the value of a surgeon, in the green box is actually a publication that dealt with what are patients seeking in surgical attributes. And they're typical things that we've been taught since medical school, but now people are saying, how can we measure this and value this? Your ability to communicate to them, to reach them at their health literacy level, your ability to be attentive to their needs, your presence, your professionalism, your caring, and so forth. When I talk to the different payers, purchasers, and hospital administrators, CFOs, and surgeons themselves, they kind of fill the blue box attributes. Is my surgeon safe, or are they creating a lot of harms? Are they affordable? Are their patients getting good PROs or good outcomes? Is access to care equitable? But the surgeons are saying, yeah, we do all of that, but we also are ready with on-demand services, on call, in almost any domain of surgical care that I cover by my training and education. That's not insignificant. And all of you have gone to conferences and meetings where you're updated constantly on the latest thises and that's from experts in the field. That's part of the value you bring back to your community, and it's not in a CPT code or in an RVU. But the fact that you're at the ready for all those different services is meaningful to a community. The same with education and training the residents on all these different features, both the green box and the elements of the blue box. And oh, by the way, we just have this registry with quality data in it. We're going to have to manage improvement cycles. And where is that in the RVU system? It doesn't exist. And yet more and more, there's a market mindset out there that's influencing all of this. So you can see that there's an enormous amount that goes into valuing the surgeon that is way beyond the RVU. And this is becoming increasingly more important as our surgeons are becoming employed and contributors to the value proposition of the organization they're in. There's other actions payers are going to make that is only going to further intensify the valuing of the surgeon as we go forward. The college has asked ourselves, how do we provide that playbook for the different types of markets our surgeons operate in that give them the plays for them to choose from, that they can make the case to their employer perfectly honestly for the value that they bring. I want to touch a little bit on what's going on with quality and MIPS and the MIPS to value proposition that CMS is trying to put forth. And it's becoming more and more important because penalties are becoming more and more egregious. So that if you're in that bottom bucket, you're going to feel a lot more pain. Part of that is because the bottom pays the top. So as CMS is trying to reward those who are doing well, the only way they can reward them is not really new money. There's no more new money in this program. Now they take from those who are underperforming according to their standards and paying those who are overperforming according to their standards. So it really calls to question, what are these standards? And do they meet what we think are important to surgical patients? And the short answer is no, they're failing. CMS knows they're failing. Most of the industry and quality knows they're failing. Their measures in specialty medicine are burdensome and inadequate. They do pretty good in some chronic care areas, but overall, they've not got surgeons banding together with anesthesia, ICU, ER, all the nurses and saying, boy, we can wrap our arms around this and actually perform better and be rewarded by a payment incentive and system. They do that on their own professionalism, but not based on a payment reward system. So we have been working with CMS to say that in effect, what they're doing is it's actually distracting surgeons from what they should be doing. And we've been calling the quality agency, CCSQ of CMS, to say what we should be doing is looking at clinical domains like trauma, like cancer, like bariatrics, like vascular, like geriatric surgery, and say, have you built the right structure? Do you have the right processes in care so that more likely than not, that you can have preventable harms, safe surgery, the best outcomes. And we're not really at a point where we can measure the kinds of outcomes using PROs. The PRO response rate is so dismal, it's about 8 to 10%, that you can't rely on PROs to do this job. So we're making the argument that the ACS verification programs structurally provide clinical service lines with the right structure and processes to more likely than not succeed, and that this is much more valuable to the care of the surgical patient than you're ever going to find in this sporadic, disconnected effort that is MIPS, hospital quality reporting, SNF reporting, home health reporting. There's 24 different reporting programs in CMS, and none of them link a patient across the surgical domain within a clinical area. So this is where we're making our big pitch. We're talking to others to try and co-opt folks like the NCQA, who does HEDIS measures, to have HEDIS hold the insurers accountable. That's a tough talk, but we're doing it. And then we're having a similar conversation with the Joint Commission. But at the same time, CMS is trying to make their own way within the law, within MIPS, without having to change the law to get an ACS verification program somehow valued in MIPS. So we continue to work on that. We may actually have to work on legislative changes to get MIPS trimmed to meet this demand. So we want verification that will tier sites to meeting that verification. We've got multiple verification programs like the general surgery quality verification, which is overarching, but then more specific program credits such as geri care, trauma, cancer, bariatrics, and so forth. And we're pursuing, as I mentioned, the NCQA Joint Commission. I want to mention something about price transparency, because this is the other part of the relationship of quality and price and getting the value. And there's big movements here that are coming in January that we're all going to feel. It's a different sort of pain than you're getting with the No Surprise Act. And Mark, your presentation was excellent and the work you've done was stellar. So I really enjoyed hearing that. I'm sad to see the way the direction is going with the insurers, but we'll just keep fighting that good fight. So price transparency is going to have a market impact. The law now calls for all the hospitals to report on up to 300 different prices and the insurers on 500 different prices come January 1. Now, most of these prices are single services, price of an office visit, price of a lab, price of a CT, price of an MR, but some of them are prices of an episode of care. What is the price of a cholecystectomy? What is the price of a total joint replacement? Total price. The pre-op services, the in-facility services, and the post-op services. Combine all the services together, what does it mean to a patient for total price of care? What's their out-of-pocket cost? And you're supposed to come within $400. Good luck with that one. But we are working very hard in trying to create this as a reasonable standard way of getting good faith estimates in front of our patients. We're calling for standardized approach to episode definitions. This is an unstandardized approach. It's a little schematic that I put together that says, oh, colectomy for cancer, or maybe a AAA, or maybe a bariatric case. So if each major insurer out there had their own episode price, you also have to look at their own episode definitions. What if they include and exclude different things? One does surgery and anesthesia in the facility for 30 days and excludes everyone else. The other one says, no, we want everybody in on our price. How does this help a patient? It's going to create confusion. It's going to create a mess at the delivery point of care. People are going to be distracted from the quality they want us to give because we'll be trying to figure out the episode definitions. This is really the hospitals love this because it creates the chaos that they'd like to see. But it doesn't help our surgeons or our patients, and we'll suffer the consequences. We look more to creating a standardized episode definition. One definition, all the payers have to use it, and then they can negotiate and set whatever price they want. And we can argue over the price points, but the episodes should be defined the same, inclusions and exclusions. There's a good part of the market that is in favor of this approach. Of course, United, Optum Healthcare wants to control all of this, and we are battling, trying to say episode definitions should be in the hands of the medical community and not in the hands of the insurers. So that's an ongoing policy debate that we're deeply involved in. Probably the lead of all of medicine rests on the shoulders of the American College of Surgeons. Part of this is also another project that Dr. Hoyt launched, and I've been spearheading it in follow-up to his work. It's with the American College of Surgeons and the Harvard Business School, where we actually take an episode of care, colectomy, AAA, as I mentioned, bariatrics, and we provide a breakdown of price based on actual Medicare payments, allowable charges, the patient and Medicare, to the episode team, as well as the production cost. What did it take the team to come together and deliver those services, pre-op, in-facility, and post-discharge? So we give you a price and cost. We risk adjust this according to the CMS risk calculator they use for Medicare Advantage plans, so that if you're a high-risk facility that deals with high-risk patients, your price is going to look much different than someone who is a low-risk institution. We provide the institution with their payer mix, so you can see who's doing Medicaid and a lot of free care, or who's doing a lot of commercial and so forth. We provide the surgeons with knowledge, enabling them to contribute to their organization, their value, their quality, their price, and their cost. And the participating sites who are in the pilot are starting to learn how to leverage this knowledge to the benefit of the surgeon and their service lines. This is a St. Elsewhere hospital that shows kind of one of the overarching reports that shows for a colectomy for cancer, Medicare paid in the Medicare allowable for all their cases, almost $30,000. Their typical patient that we modeled their production, their overall estimated production cost was almost $22,000. This institution has a balanced risk profile, which leans toward high-risk patients. It's a high-volume institution. You can see they've got a very high commercial payer rate down there in the payer mix with the big blue circle arc in place. And you can look at their overall benchmarking for production costs. So this is a way of taking a service line, a procedure within a service line. So cancer is a service line, colectomy is a procedure, and building out the framework for price and cost. And we leave quality up to dealer's choice, whatever the institution wants to substitute for their quality. That allows you to make your value expression using your own resources. But of course, we're going to promote what we think is the best, and that is to use the quality verification program to state your quality position and the NISQA safety profile for your complication rates. And we're not so keen on CMS star ratings. The ICHOM metrics are really good. They're PRO based, but they're really hard to get. So we don't give them as much support as one might want. Lastly, this is one quick slide. There is so much going on in digital healthcare, so much money going into this space. This is basically the admission that the amount of knowledge it takes to manage medicine today for the journey of a patient, their full journey, their full episode of care, exceeds many times the ability of us as individual physicians to perform the task. That it takes a village, that it's going to take machine learning and AI to synthesize and express all the knowledge we need. And then we need to take that knowledge and leverage it for the complex needs of our patients. The physician-patient relationship will be informed by this knowledge environment. And we as the college are just embarking upon this. It has its public outcry, and the amount of money going into this space is insane. It's in the $100 billion range plus, and it's just growing every day. They are looking at no longer, is this an EHR question? EHRs were just a point of entry into this space. They're looking at platforms, data lakes, AI and ML. Delivery systems are looking at this, plans, collaboratives coming together. The government, DOD and VA, they're dumping everything into Oak Ridge AI, which is probably the most sophisticated AI in the world. And watching them turn on the data is just exciting. I mean, it really is. Everything from clinical enrichment, care pathways, appropriateness, clinical decision support, research. This is getting to the point of approaching real time, as in 5 to 7 seconds to generate real-time knowledge. The college is currently pilot testing. We've built our own platform. We've connected to the HIE world instead of the EHR world. And so we're sucking in a ton of digital data that we're looking at in a cancer project where we can actually enhance the data and support the decision support, structured operative reports, and so forth. We don't quite know where this is going. Like I say, it's a pilot test feasibility, but we think the surgeons are going to play a crucial role in knowledge sharing, in knowledge management. This isn't about EHR to EHR chit chats. This is about giving you reams of knowledge for you to leverage, for you to deliver better care. So that's what this digital space is becoming. When they sit together and they talk about where are we going, they ask questions that are just beyond me. They say, okay, where do we want to be in 2050? I said, my gosh, in 2050, I will be so long gone, I can't even begin that question. Can we just do 2030? But that's how these folks think. Anyway, that's a quick rundown on future state stuff. There's a lot going on, and I think the future is bright for so many of you, and I'm excited for what's happening and what we're doing as the college. And thank you again for letting me join you tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Opelka, for all of your insights, which are so timely, and even trying to look at the future. I wanted to first make a comment about MIPS, in that we know that this program has about $550 million allocated to it by Congress, but I really don't think that each congressman who is on a committee that engendered MIPS understands how it really works, and that I can just give you an example. One of my cardiology friends who is in the top 1% of quality of care of his Medicare group of patients received a wonderful letter saying that he was very high up in all of the quality of care, and he received a check from MIPS for $3.55. So when you have a program where it sounds great on paper, but the physician is not really being rewarded for this quality of care, that creates an issue. I'd also like to ask you, Dr. Opelka, about price transparency and how price could be connected to quality. And I'm going to ask you by giving two examples. One is the healthcare system in Switzerland, where there are about 40 million people, which is the number of people who have no healthcare in the United States. And they have a 3-tier system. Everyone gets basic healthcare, and then there's a level above that where you pay extra, and then a third level where you pay more if you have specialized problems or you actually want a more experienced surgical professor, let's say. And then the other example of restaurants and cars. We go to McDonald's and it costs $8 to get our meal, and the quality is very, very fair. It's poor, maybe, but it feeds people. And that's what some people can afford. Other people can afford to go to a wonderful restaurant and pay $100 or $200 a person, but there's still transparency on the menu of each. When you go to the fancy restaurant, it doesn't say that your meal is going to cost $50 plus X that we'll decide at the end afterward. And it's the same thing when you walk onto a car lot. Both Kia and Mercedes will get you where you want to go, but you're definitely paying extra for a Mercedes. And are you paying extra for quality, for a name? I think you're paying for quality, but you know, it's a very debatable issue. Can you kind of enlighten us on that?
Well, a couple of things. First, there's a lot packed into what you just said, and I don't disagree with what you're insinuating at all. MIPS is not a quality program, and that's where the Congress has actually missed the mark. It's a payment incentive program, and you can see how many dollars are involved, that there's enough people on the upside, but there's not enough money to share that you get a $3 bonus. And that's comical. And it probably cost $20,000, $25,000 to achieve that $3 bonus. It's not inexpensive. So the return on the investment, there are many people who have said, I'll take the penalty because it makes better business sense to be penalized than it does to actually get a MIPS reward, because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But it's worse than that. And as the program continues, that $500 million is going away, and it's going to a 9% penalty. So there'll be even less money to share, and there'll be bigger penalties. And they're hoping the 9% penalty helps feed the pool of and replace the 500 million. And they're hoping that gets people's attention. Well, that would make sense if it was real quality and people would care. It would be an act of professionalism, but it's not. It is a payment incentive program. So we've got to, and we've been working the agency over and the National Quality Forum. The college migrated away from the National Quality Forum because we told them this is not quality, this is payment incentive. And what we really need is quality. And if you want to look for a program in quality, look at the verification programs. Look at what trauma's done. Look at what cancer's done. Look at what bariatrics done. And our track record is in the literature. And it's meaningful and actionable, and it means something to patients. So how do we brand college compliant or conformant institutions in such a way that when a patient looks at a $35,000 bill, the first thing they're going to say is, what am I getting for this bill? And we can tell them what you're getting is level 1 trauma. What you're getting is cancer verification. And that's what's missing. You can't tell them you're getting a MIPS program quality measure for something that had nothing to do with the care you got. So if you have someone who's sick and you ask them to go on to the CMS Care Compare website and find out where to get good care, what they'll find is where to get a good EHR run facility, but they won't find anything about the surgical care or the cardiac care or the GI care. It's not there. And that's the measure, the standard by which Congress should be measuring CMS and the MIPS program. They should be saying themselves, if I, as a congressman, need my family member to get care, then where do they find it based on the Care Compare site? Because it isn't there. And that's our point. And it's starting to hit home, but we need to hit this harder. As to your points about price and price transparency, the system is broken. I don't think anybody really disputes the fact that fee-for-service, we're just tacking on more fees and we're tacking on more volume. We need to get to the point where we can actually tell a patient who's threatened bankruptcy by the care system, the way it's being delivered, this is what the service you're going to get from our surgical team. This is our expected price based on your risk profile, and this is your estimated out-of-pocket cost. And I personally, just in my own being, I believe that we owe that to our patients, that they are not surprised. And I think Mark actually hit this nail on the head years ago when he started fighting this fight in New York. It's been taken in the wrong direction with the No Surprise Act. But our surgeons feel this way. We're trying to do good with our hospitals, good with all these elements of care. If you look at the total cost of surgical care, it's not the surgeon. We're 10, 15% of the total bill. It's everything else. And that has to be, for our benefit and the benefit of our patients, that has to be put out on the street so that everybody actually says, did we really need to provide all of these services, or maybe not?
So we have a question in the chat box commenting that if you went to McDonald's and wanted a Big Mac meal, which is listed at $8, and you ate the meal and said, no, I shall pay you only $1.30, that's it, it wouldn't be acceptable, and they'd call the police. Why is it okay for surgeon reimbursement to reflect that?
Yeah, I understand there's a big difference between the healthcare and some of the other sectors like the food industry and so forth. And it's an interesting point. It's a good argument. I think we've got a bigger social issue that we're trying to address, and that is that healthcare is only getting more costly because the science is ever growing and ever expanding. There's a social good, but there's a limit to what we can afford. We have been reducing, or Emma outlined beautifully, we have not been keeping up with inflation in Medicare. It's not that Medicare doesn't know this. They're fully aware of what they're doing. What's happened, though, is that we have moved from commercial insurance being 150% of Medicare to now it's 250 to 300% of Medicare nationwide. What that's doing to us in the global market in competitive businesses is not good. And the big corporations of America are now saying, we're not going to take this much longer. Walmart themselves pays over $4 billion to purchase healthcare in America. And they're watching that $4 billion very closely. If they could cut 10% of the waste out, they just netted $400 million. That's not chump change, even to Walmart. So we're getting the attention of the entire country, not just the federal government, but the commercial sector is looking at the health sector saying, we need to modernize and reframe healthcare like we've done all of our other businesses. And that's why you're seeing an investment in alternative payment models. You're seeing an investment in equity acquisitions and mergers. You're seeing investments in digital healthcare. That's commercial sector stepping in, and they're stepping in a big way. We've got to figure out our role in preserving the knowledge management and what is ours as the world reframes.
I'd also like to ask each of the panelists, speakers, about full-time surgery practice and private practice. And does it really matter if you're a full-time physician, whether they're cutting Medicare rates, you're going to get paid by the hospital? And will it drive more people certainly out of private practice? Or do you think that it shouldn't matter whether you choose private practice or being a full-time physician?
I certainly can't speak to that question as a physician, not being one myself, but what I can say is that eventually the hospitals will feel that squeeze too, and eventually it will trickle down from them to the employed physicians. And short of that, it also takes away a lot of the bargaining power that physicians currently have. One of the things that I think doctors have in their back pocket if they're looking to be employed is if they don't like the contract, they can say that they might go open their own private practice or join an independent group. And as that becomes more cost prohibitive, they lose the ability to really have that option.
Dr. Reiner?
I think that it's always an issue for the full-time versus the voluntary or private physicians. I think that basically they should be the same, but unfortunately they're not. I think that the private physician often gives a different type of care. And the reason they give a different type of care is because their actual income is based on not only their expertise, but on their talents, but on their personalities, on how much they care for the patients. I know that at my hospital, if you get acute appendicitis at 10 o'clock at night, the average surgeon will not do an appendectomy until the morning. Now, I personally think that that's wrong, and my group will do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, even if the reimbursement is $280 or for free. I think it's a different philosophy of practice. And I think even though that's not completely true for all full-time individuals, I just see a different level of care, not necessarily worse, but I'm talking about on a personal level, on a ability to reinforce the patient, to make the phone calls, to answer them. I think that that's just different because the volumes in private practice, depending on the volumes, it can be either higher or lower, depending on the methodology of reimbursement. So a physician, what we've done in medicine, I believe, is instead of bringing the bottom down, we brought the top up. I'm sorry, instead of bringing the bottom up, we brought the top down. And I find that that is very disturbing. I think that we're not going to have a choice. Private practice is pretty much going to be limited to a very, very small group of people whose patients who want not just good care, but want to be handheld. And I think that that's important. You know, we certainly try to do that in our practice. I'm not sure that that's always the case from the full-time people that I see. It's just not, the availability is not the same. You call at 2 o'clock in the morning, you get the on-call physician. You don't get your surgeon, or the on-call surgeon, and there are 30 on-call surgeons in the group. It's just not quite the same. I think when you take away personal incentive, okay, when you don't control your own money, I find that the attitudes change. Maybe not in the first 3, 4, 5, or 6 years of practice, but certainly 15 and 20 years later.
Dr. Opelka?
This is an extraordinarily complex question. To me, that what we're seeing is a reframing of practice. I think Mark has perfectly described what's happening in the current transition. But I think the practice is getting so overregulated and there's so many business demands that it's taking you away from the value-based activities of a highly successful, well-branded market mindset in a value-based equation. And to me, it would be, if I were a young surgeon coming out, I'd say, I just want to take care of patients and operate. I don't want to do all this business stuff. And that's what I hear from most of these young physicians who are coming out. And I want to be part of the team and I want to build something. But they're not trying to build a business empire. The business empire they're building is their clinical practice, their patient base, and their reputation in the patient base. And that, I think, there's going to be a reframing of how we orient ourselves and redirect our activities in this next gen of surgeons. And in some ways, I'm excited for them because they're going to see knowledge and have population health data I'd never had. And I always wonder, how did all my cancer patients do if I had some 700 or 800 cancers that I operated on? What's my overall success rate? I have no idea. And these guys are going to know. These gals are going to be well informed. So it's going to be a different type, a different rethinking and reframing. But there's a transition to go through from what Mark described to what I'm talking about. There's something in between, and I'm anxious to see what it's going to look like.
I'm very happy that all of us are using the term physician, surgeon, because I am definitely not a provider. Dr. D'Andrea?
Those were 3 amazing talks, and the commentary has been very educational. Myself, I just finished my fellowship training, and I'm going to start my job as a colorectal surgeon in the next few weeks. And so, I think exactly as you said, Dr. Opelka, my main goal in the next 5 years is to be a good provider, take excellent care of my patients, build a patient base and a good reputation, and do the right thing. But I know that there's a lot going on in the background as, Dr. Reiner is heavily involved in legislation at the local and New York State. And then Emma talked about all these, scary changes happening in terms of reimbursement, and then kind of the future of quality and value and knowledge management is just like so much to look forward to. I guess my main question for the 3 of you is, aside from getting involved in the local ACS, like signing up, I'll be in Texas, so I'll sign up for the Texas State American College of Surgeons and just try to listen in and join the meetings and read along whatever updates I get. Are there any other points of advice you can provide so that young people, young surgeons can be more aware of all that's happening and maybe if they have the time and energy to participate in these endeavors?
So I think what's important to me is the state advocacy. It's very difficult to be out of state, even though we've done some in Washington with the ACS. I think the first stage is to look at your local group, your local chapter, get actively involved with them. And from there, you can go on and see a little bit more about what's going on in the world. You know, every year, except for the last couple of years, we take our chief residents out to dinner. We get them a little drunk, you know, get them a drink. And then I always ask them a standard question. And that question is, so we're a 4-person group. What do we pay for insurance premiums? Health insurance, disability, malpractice. And they quote numbers of $150,000 or $200,000. When I tell them it's $700,000, they turn white. And then I try to explain to them what Medicare pays for a hernia, and then how many hernias you have to do just to pay your malpractice, and what's an acceptable volume for both the full-time academic surgeon and the private practitioner. And you're right, they don't really have any concept of dollars and cents or business, but the reality is that they've been sheltered. They're 30 years old, they finished their residency, they're now having families. They have no idea what it costs to buy a house. They have no idea what it costs to put their kids through school. It's a problem. We're not educating. I'm not saying that money should be the focus of their life, but they have to understand that the stresses involved that they're going to go through and what they need to be adequate, both as physicians and spouses and fathers, has to be looked at. They really need to be educated on this. And once they're educated, then perhaps they will be able to be even more actively involved. What we find is once they get to that stage and they're not ever educated about it, they just don't get involved. They don't see it. They just don't get it.
But we have a lot of other national health services, whether it's Canada, the United Kingdom, where they're able to make what they make, and they still have families and go on vacations, and so it's a different system from what we have here, but obviously it can be done in that regard.
Yeah, I would say, so for a young guy coming out, I like what Mark had said about getting involved locally. It really begins locally. And for me, it began locally and in my local community. And there are mentors who will find you and they'll sweep you into something. There are opportunities in education, in quality, in what we're doing in digital healthcare, and in research. You can't do it all. It's almost impossible to be the triple threat today. But what are those 1 or 2 areas that are just outside your normal daily workflow that add a little more color to who you are internally, to yourself? And try something, and if it doesn't fit, don't stay there. Look for the next one and move to the next one. And you may find that the first one you picked wasn't what you thought it was. That doesn't mean you're done. It means you got to go pick a second one. And you'll eventually find it. And you'll end up in a position where you're not just that guy every day just driving in doing the same thing. There'll be more dimensions to you as a surgeon, and there'll be more value that you bring to your colleagues and to your patients because of the extra effort you made.
I also think as far as advocacy goes, starting at the state level is very important. In New York State, we have our Advocacy Day every April. We get to meet the assemblymen, the state legislators, and that's always an important place to start, is at your state chapter level. So that's been my advice to our members of the SSAT Public Policy and Advocacy Committee. Then you can move on to federal issues as you have more of a handle on the state issues. And then involving yourself with ACS. I happen to be on the legislative committee as well. Then I can learn all of the things that are going on that our ACS team is helping to fight for in Congress. But knowing at the state level is a much easier way of coming into the system of advocacy, I think. I agree.
The state is the sandbox.
Also, the truth is, from the federal level, from the national level, it has much less impact, unless you're talking about Medicare and Medicaid, or for instance, this new bill, the surprise bill. But the reality is that most surgeons are more impacted locally than they are nationally. And it's important that they recognize that. And you're right, they need to see whether they may want to go national, and that's perfectly fine, but they just need to be educated, and it's our responsibility to be mentored and to educate them, get them actively involved from the very, very beginning. I find that that's the best way of actually us improving our profession and improving our patient care. They need to know and then try to come up with their own solutions, which very often are better than ours.
As a federal lobbyist, I want to say that all the action is in Washington, D.C., but these gentlemen are right. It really does start at the state level. And I will just add to that, because I think they captured the advice part great, just a comment that you absolutely have a role to play in policymaking. There are a handful of members of Congress who are physicians by training, and they are our biggest champions on all of these issues. And there's a reason for that. It's because they have lived this stuff and they know what we're talking about when we go into their offices and say this is a problem. And when you are meeting with members who don't have that expertise, it's a lot harder to communicate this stuff. And likewise, for those of us who are doing the advocacy, it is harder for us who aren't physicians to speak to it at the personal level that you all can. Healthcare is one of the largest, policy sectors that there is, one of the most active. There's never a dull moment. And so it is that much more important to have people who are actually the on the ground experts in this stuff coming and talking to policymakers about it. So, remind your colleagues that you absolutely have a role to play here.
Interestingly, as Dr. Opelka mentioned about Walmart is probably one of the largest primary care providers in the United States right now. So how are we dealing with that, Emma, as far as legislation regarding what Walmart does within the House of Medicine?
I mean, to Dr. Reiner's point, the activity at the federal level really is primarily Medicare and to a lesser extent Medicaid. There is not nearly as much of an appetite on the Hill to get involved in the private insurance market. That being said, to Dr. Opelka's point, the large employers that are paying this much money as healthcare costs are going up and up and up are going to notice. And they're going to start putting pressure on Congress and the administration from the outside. And that's going to have an impact eventually. And I don't know if it's going to be as much, us associations kind of anticipating that, where as opposed to the private sector bringing it to us, making it an issue. And I think it's something that we're going to see eventually. But that being said, so far the focus is on the part that Congress can impact directly with the federal programs.
Any final comments, Dr. Reiner, Dr. Opelka, regarding what we can do as physicians with regard to surprise billing, quality? What's our next step? Whether we're full-time, voluntary, where do we go?
Well, surprise billing, I think Mark did a wonderful job there. Pat Bailey in our office is lead on this one. Pat's he's just about finished law school, which makes him even more dangerous to everyone out there. So he's got his arms around this, trying to figure out where the choke points are. It's not good the way it's laid out, and the insurance companies have got an unfair advantage, and it's going to take a real fight to reverse that. I'm more confident in the quality. I think everyone feels like what we're doing isn't what we need to be doing, and we're trying to find the path forward that lets the college do what it does well and shine. Because of guys like Clifco, we'll get there. It's just longer than expected.
Mark?
Once again, I agree. The surprise and emergency bill from a local, state, and federal level, as long as the insurance companies will manipulate it, it will never be a fair system. There are many ways, though, that we can lower the cost of healthcare by shifting cases outside the major academic universities where the cost of medicine is so much more for a variety of different reasons. So by moving patients to ambulatory surgical centers, to not non-affiliated, but non-run and non-owned hospital bases and academic centers will dramatically be able to affect the cost. Obviously the major hospitals who have huge control and huge interest and huge lobbying in New York and everywhere else, they're adverse to this. But the reality is we can dramatically change the cost of medical care by just moving things out of the major academic institutions. There's no reason that 60% or 70% of surgery at a Duke or a Sinai or a Stanford should be done at an academic institution. And you can drop it to 16, 18, 20% and send those other patients to an outside facilities, which are 20, 30, 40, 50% less the cost of care. And just that alone would dramatically save an enormous amount of money. Hospitals just don't want to do this unless they control it. And if they control it, they have the same issues. They're going to get reimbursed at a higher level. They're going to have the same issues that they have at the institution. It will cost a little less to supply the service, but the reality is that it's not going to be significantly less from the insurance company's point of view in payment. And what we're really trying to do is shift that paradigm to savings that are legitimate, that either don't affect quality of care or actually increase quality of care. And I think by taking these cases out of academic institutions, you actually increase the quality, don't decrease it.
Dr. D'Andrea, any concluding comments?
Thank you, everyone, for your talks. You guys have brought to light a number of issues, and I hope that our listeners and viewers have gained a significant amount of awareness in public policy issues affecting the care of surgical patients. Thank you once again. I have no further comments.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And now we have to go get to work on our state and federal representatives. We have our task at hand.
Have a nice night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.